I had the fantastic opportunity yesterday to get toured around by somebody whose work I respect and got a chance to have a lot of nice conversations. And it's one of those things where you have a new learning experience, you get into it, you have no idea what you're going to see, what you're going to do, you don't know what you're going to learn. I walked into Sagrada Familia for the first time and went, wow, I don't understand any of this. It's not surprising. I mean, Gaudi's a genius on a level that, but I really didn't get anything the first time around. Fortunately, I had a bit of a mentor, I had a guide. Lisa's been there, I don't know what, 12 times now you've been to Sagrada Familia? 3 times. So I had a guide, I had a mentor. Not somebody who was telling me what to learn, but somebody who was there with me to walk me through the process. And we went up to one of the top of the towers. We discovered the two of us are both afraid of heights. Not sure why we decided to go up the tower, but... and then we went through it, and at the end she goes, okay, we have to go down to the museum. So we went down, still? I'm right over them, not enough. Okay. So we went down to the museum and looked through, and it's the explanations, like this is this leaf, and this goes with this piece, and this is a tree, and this is a whatever. And we went through that process while we were talking about pedagogy again. And then I went back through, and I could see a little tiny bit of the genius that is Gaudi, and a little tiny bit of the beauty that is that building. But there's something about not knowing what you're going to learn, not knowing what you need to know, and still being able to go through that process that to me is kind of the experience of the 21st century, right? And that's kind of, so I work at a school of medicine, right? And every time I talk about rhizomatic learning, people tell me, yeah, but you'd never train a doctor that way. What about medicine? What about a doctor? You don't want your doctor trained at random, just walking around learning things. We're going to talk a little bit about that, because it turns out it's exactly how doctors are trained. This is the premise that I'd like us to think about all the way through this piece, and I'll try to keep it to half an hour, but I don't think I'll be able to. In the age of information abundance, we don't know what we don't know. I did not know what I was going to learn walking into Sagrada Familia. I don't know on any given day when I work what I'm going to need that day. And often, I don't know what I should know, right? And so much of our learning is designed on the paper model, on the scarcity model, where there's only so many things you can know. And if you find a random expert, that person's going to be able to tell you what you need. And my suggestion here is we pass that point. Okay, so first I want to establish some basic language around complexity. And this is something I do all the time because I think that there are maybe some things that we should learn in the method that you described because they're not complex concepts. They're established algebraic foundational principles that we need to learn in a systemic way. So I'm certainly not trying to say that everything needs to be taught the same way. So there are simple things. You know, turn on the light switch, turn off the light switch, right? Here is this thing that you need to know. It's easily measured, doesn't require subject matter expertise. You can go on to Google and get the answer to one of these things, right? And from my medical context here, take this pill, you'll be fine tomorrow, right? It's a simple question, it's a simple answer. As you start to look, some things are complicated, right? I don't want anybody getting creative in the building of this airplane. I don't want any self-directed learning with the attaching of the wings or where your bolt goes. There's an established step-by-step process that I want every single person in that picture to follow, right? There's no creativity involved, right? None of that. I'm not saying we don't, but at some point you need the humans to design the model. Maybe eventually we don't. I think you take the point, though. You accept the point that there complicated processes move to AI super quickly. I agree with you. So they're more difficult to measure. You might have more than one possible solution. There's a couple of different ways you can build an airplane. It absolutely requires subject matter expertise. And my medical example is do the surgery. Now, there are complexities sometimes in surgery, but there's an established process they're meant to follow, right? And we don't want people getting creative with their scalpel. I don't know why that's scalpel, but What I'm particularly interested in is complexity. Okay? This is where I think rhizomatic learning is particularly useful, and I think this is the real challenge that many of us have. So I want you to look at the next picture, and I'll lead this up to hit the translation, and tell me how you think the gentleman is doing. Oops, where's my picture? There it is. How's he doing? Do you think he is being very successful today? Maybe? Not really. How do we, what's that, sorry? He is definitely trying. But how do we teach him to be better? What do we fix? How do we go through the process of helping this person be better at what he's doing? Feedback, right? Sense, respond, yeah, for sure.
Not YouTube at that period, I think.
What's that?
No YouTube at that
There's no YouTube. No, he's not going to be learning on his own that way. Maybe he should take the instrument out of her face, right? But when it comes to this, it's very difficult to find one specific answer that we're going to be doing. There's no step-by-step approach I can give this gentleman to make him any better at what he's doing. It's not a directly measurable problem. I can't tell you he is wrong this way. It's not a measurable thing. I can't say he's made 62% on his wooing of that woman. It doesn't work out that way, right? It doesn't have one solution. There's no way to solve the problem. You can only work on one part of it at a time. So I can help him with his outfit. I can maybe help him be a better singer, right? But you can only work on bits and pieces of the problem. And for us in medicine, helping a patient is always like this, right? Because the biggest part of the medical process, every doctor that I work with says the same thing. The biggest problem is connecting with the patient. How can I make a human connection with the patient so I can find out enough to help them? It's a complex problem, right? And something we really, really struggle to teach in medical education. Okay, so that establishes the language. So from my perspective, to declare my bias in this, right? I want learners who can look for answers, not the answer. I don't think we live in that world, right, where there's one answer to a problem. Are there simple and complicated things that have one answer? Yeah, but not complexity, not the real important things that we worried about. So I want learners to be able to deal with complexity. I would argue that most learning models have this idea of objectives, and objectives that are designed to be completed. Here's this thing you need to know. Here's this thing I've decided I need to know. Now I know it. Now I'm done. That's okay for some things. That doesn't lead to lifelong learning, right? You need to know, in most learning models, you need to know what you need to know before you start learning. So somebody in the room has to decide what it is you need to learn. In my experience of life, my experience working with my staff, my experience running a school, writing strategy, all the stuff I've done, is generally speaking, I don't know what I need to know when I start, right? I need to get in and get started, and usually I start somewhere in the middle and learn my way around, right? And that's where rhizomatic learning comes in. And again, I would suggest that it's directly connected to the technologies we have available, right? So 62 BCE, Julius Caesar wants to learn how to speak, right? He needs to become a better orator. He travels 2 weeks over to the island of Rhodes to see Apollonius Molon, who was the best educator for speakers at the time. Same person Cicero went to, right? He was captured by pirates, who he then went back and crucified later, because he's Julius Caesar and he's a bad guy. But at this time period, your only real option for learning was people. Was there writing? Yes. But the real process for learning was finding a mentor, finding a human, finding a person who can help you through that process. I still think that's the best learning there is. I don't care how much technology you get. You find me somebody who knows what they're doing and I can have their time, I love it. But it doesn't scale to 120, does it? Right? Yeah, it doesn't scale. So trying to be a lifelong learner, trying to learn by yourself in 62 BCE was about the people you could find and connect to. the people you could afford to go visit, right? The people who are in your immediate circle, your parents, right? That was the extent of your ability to be a lifelong learner. That's what you had access to. When we zoom forward 1,200 years, this is from a flyer that was posted on the wall at the University of Paris from the University of Toulouse. It was an advertisement. Those who wish to scrutinize the bosom of nature to the inmost can hear at the University of Toulouse the books of Aristotle, which were forbidden at Paris. But the important word here is hear. So what you could do was sit in a room and listen to somebody read the text of somebody who died a really long time ago. There's your learning process, right? And be an effective learner using that technology. When we talk about writing, being an effective learner is being able to remember exactly what the person said, right? Long form memory business. The technology works that way, right? So you end up with a catechetical teaching style, right? Same word as catechism, right? It's catechetical. I say, you say, I say, you say, and it starts to build into your brain. The technology leads us in that direction, right? Does anybody know Pestalozzi? Any Pestalozzi fans? One Pestalozzi fan? Whoever knows Pestalozzi. I love this guy. He's my educational hero, okay? In Switzerland, at the end of the 18th century, he built two really beautiful schools. They were much like the school you mentioned earlier from Australia. They were fantastic. They failed. Nobody understood them. But they were really cool. But one of the other things he did was he decided he wanted to teach the entire country of Switzerland how to read. Right? Think about the challenge there. There were not enough teachers. There was nothing to work with. But he had this vision for how he could teach an entire country how to read. It's a beautiful vision. This is from his book, How Gertrude Teaches Her Children. I assert definitely that a school book is only good when an uninstructed schoolmaster can use it at need, almost as well as an instructed or talented one. Right here we see the technology of print. Right? We see that you can print a textbook, print hundreds of them, and pass them around. And a textbook is designed so that the teacher doesn't need to understand the material inside of it. As long as they start at the front and they flip the pages. I'm not saying anybody else is like that, but Pestalozzi designed his textbook so the teacher didn't need to understand what they were doing. We've moved further and further away from the mentor, right? You're being more and more distanced from any control over what's learning. Right now, someone far away published a textbook, decided exactly what you needed to know, maybe 5 years ago, printed it up, packaged it, and sent it out to you. Your teacher doesn't know why. You don't know why. Why we got more and more removed from the process. Now, suddenly, we've gone from this era of scarcity to one of information abundance. Now we have all this connected access. We can access those books. We can access the copies of the text. We get the textbooks. We can access people from all around the world. And the question becomes, what does this mean for our learning? What does this mean that we can do in our classrooms? What does it mean we need to do, right? And what does it mean we don't need to do anymore, right? And that's really where I come to from Rhizomatic Learning, is it's kind of the story I use. I think the story you gave this morning is another great story for that, and there are others out there. But for me, it helps me think about how I design. So I've designed for university classrooms, I've designed for K-12 classrooms, I've designed for open learning for MOOCs, right? All with these same thoughts in the back of my head. I'm not even saying they're right, but just trying to give you the story of how I try to process these ideas. So you can't Google a complex problem, right? You got all the information out there, but you can Google around. It's not going to get you an answer to something that's complex, to something that's difficult. You'll get a simple answer, but not a complex one. And then we go back to that core thought. You don't know what you don't know, right? 500 years ago, the scope of knowledge was pretty narrow. And now for a regular average staff member in a regular average company, what you need to know is huge. And what you need to know today is not necessarily what you need to know next week. The number of times I've had staff come up to me and go, did we just change that technology again? And I go, that was 5 years ago, right? But there's this incredible resistance to change. They wanted to go through the textbook, learn the thing, and then have that learning for the rest of their life. It's just not the world we live in, right? It's just not our reality anymore. And my staff don't even know what they don't know, right? So our structured learning involves the guy with the gun. Oh, he's off site. That's too bad. It's basically run by the guy with the gun. Line up, get ready to learn. Everybody ready? Go, right? That doesn't get us anywhere we need to go. How many of you woke up this morning thinking, you know what, I know exactly what I need to learn, and I know where to go find it, and I'm going to get that set up? How many people's life works this way? The physics guy, that's fine. I totally get that. No, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing, because I'm not saying this is for everybody. What I'm saying is there are, for many of us, we don't know what we need to know. We don't wake up in the morning going, I'm going to go take this class because that's the thing I need. For a lot of us, we don't even know those classes exist, right? So this learning model is not about I'm going to learn this exact thing, but rather I'm going to commit myself to learn and then expect that through that process, I'll get the things that I need to know, right? So I'll talk a little bit about rhizomes. I know we're running a little late, so I'll keep us going. What do you figure, 10 more minutes? He's just saying yes, whatever you want. He's saying 15 minutes? Oh, 15 minutes. Look at you. So rhizomes, anybody know what this plant is? It's Japanese knotweed. It's the nastiest weed. Oh, it's terrible. So at the London Olympics in 2012, they found one stalk of it. In order to guarantee it wasn't going to wreck the foundations of the building, they dug down 30 feet and around it by 30 feet. Because the tiniest little stalk of it, of the rhizome, if you throw it over there, it'll start growing over there. If you throw it over there, it'll start growing there. It's a nasty, nasty weed. And that's the sort of core of the metaphor that I think of for learning. It doesn't start at the start of the race and move its way forward. Wherever it lands, it can start to move, right? So this, we're not going to get deep dark into the theory here, but it's founded on two philosophers from France who were writing, and actually the book is originally in 1980 in French. It's a very, very strange book. It's called 1,000 Plateaus. And at the start of the book it says, I don't even know why we started writing this book. This stuff in it's too weird. But you think of it as that map that gets created through the process of learning. Rather than an objective you have at the beginning, learning is only ever something you can look back on and go, oh, it's that thing. And I would say that's true for everybody's learning process. While you may set objectives, while you may test students, you don't actually know what's happened to people's heads, right? You don't actually see the core of the learning that's happening. It's always produced and constructed. That map is always produced and constructed as you go through. It has multiple entryways and exits, right? So you never know when you're going to start the learning and when it's going to stop, where that path is going to go. And that sort of metaphor is at the core of this piece. It's also difficult to contain. So when you start teaching this way, students wander off into random directions, right? Students do things that are very unexpected. At first they don't. I mean, Lisa was saying this earlier. At first they hate it. At first, I actually had teachers cry in my classroom because they were so frustrated with the approach, because I was teaching teachers this model. And it's because they wanted to know how to succeed. They wanted to know what it meant for them to learn. And my response was, I don't even know you yet. How am I supposed to know what you need to learn? Right? If learning is really a personal experience, I can't decide for you. But once they get there, it becomes like the weed itself, like these alders. It becomes difficult to contain, and they do actually start to follow their own paths, which can be super intimidating as a teacher, as a faculty person, as a parent, as an employer, in all those cases. Because then suddenly, instead of people doing what they're told, they come back with you with new ideas. They come to you with things that you never thought of, things you disagree with, right? There are ups and downs to this process. You have to have an openness to it. But I would argue that this only happens inside of a community. Was it you said at the beginning, the psychologist? He said we can only reason with other people. Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And you said that, it really resonated for me. Because that community of experience, that ability to navigate the credible abundance of information we have now, is not something I believe we can do on our own. When you look at a Rhizomatic community, it kind of looks like this. This is from a course we did 3 years ago, from an article you read over the weekend. Aras Buskert, who is a faculty, I think he was here, wasn't it? No, is it here?
No, he's in Oldenburg.
He's in Oldenburg. Yeah.
Yeah, plus.
So what this is the journey of these people through one of my Rhizomatic courses. The colors, when you go back and trace them, are communities that have evolved around certain kinds of topics. In no case did any of those topics end up being something that I specifically chose. Some of them are grouped by the fact that they were working with imagery. Some of them were working on specific topics. Some of them were agreeing with each other. Some of them were really disagreeing with each other. But we can track it. You can see the kind of development that can happen. And the beauty of this is that you yourself end up learning in a way that's totally unexpected every time. I ran this exact course twice in a row. Totally different results. We talked about totally different things. Still around the topic. I'm still constructing the ecology, as it were. But what actually happens within it is not necessarily decided by me. The thing, and I mean, this is one of the things you were talking about earlier, and I hate to keep referencing back to your comment, but I really appreciate it. What really ties us down to this is assessment, right? And you mentioned that in terms of the national testing. I don't actually, not to be controversial, but I don't actually believe that learning can ever be measured. I think it's something that's intensely human. I think it's something we can measure for evidence that it might have happened. We can certainly measure obedience, which is what I think most of our measurement is in our classrooms. Sorry. But when we talk about technology, when we talk about the influences on technology, when we talk on the way that companies try to help us with technology, often they confuse the way that they count money with the way that we think about learning, and certainly the way I do. I don't mean to include you guys in my bad ideas. The way that I think about learning. But I think that if we can deconstruct that idea of assessment, right? So if you can have a class where you're doing algebra and your students are learning the core pieces, and you have external challenges that allow them to work on their own, peer evaluate, and have them do some of the interesting conceptual things that can be done with algebra, but just don't grade them. Leave them totally, entirely ungraded. I have over and over been told that students won't do them. I have over and over seen that they will. If they're encouraged to be self-directed, if they're encouraged that that's self-determined, to use your expression, Lisa, learning is something that can make them better mathematicians, because it will. The extra practice will certainly help. It's also way more fun, right? And I think you can do that as long as you walk around the assessment problem. I think one of the things that we end up doing inside of these transitions is we imagine that the champion approach is the way to do transition inside of our own organizations, inside of our own schools. My experience is that's the opposite. If you are going to try to make one of these changes, you have to aim for the middle 60 group. So all change, and almost every change theory has some version of the idea that there's 20% of the people who'll do anything. Whatever new fun idea you have, they love it, and they're going to try it. There's 20% of people who hate everything. Every idea you have is terrible, and they don't want to hear it, and they don't know why you're talking, and they wish you'd stop. But the middle 60 is the real core of how our culture shifts. Both our personal cultures, our company cultures, and our societal cultures. If we design models that work for that middle 60, that maybe is a little less aggressive, that has way more training, that has a longer timeline, You have a better chance to actually make real change and to build this into your organization, your school. That uncertainty that is so much a part of the internet, I think has to be something you embrace from the beginning. You have to be willing to walk into class every day and not know what's going to happen. You have to be willing to yourself, when you go learn, go to the internet and not know what you're going to see. You have to be prepared to learn the way the internet is actually built, rather than take the paper model of learning, take the textbook model of learning, and try to superimpose it on the internet, because it's not going to work very well. I think we call those learning management systems. Some of it's about decision making. I think, you talked about how the government testing so much controlled your work at another organization that you worked in before. That's why these meetings are so important. I mean, Albert spoke last night about how critical it is that government, corporations, and universities and schools, K-12, I know we've got a couple of K-12 people here, sit together to build a shared language. That's the only way these problems get solved. The decision making has to happen at the same time. I spent 2 years in government up until about 4 months ago in Canada, and just happened to be at the meetings where some of these things were decided, and I went, you don't have to do that. And they listened, right? And it is possible to make that change. It's not change you can make in a day. It's not change that's going to help necessarily the class you're teaching now. But if we're all part of that conversation, and we are willing to open up those lines of communication, we just need everybody who's involved in the decision to be at the same table, right? We need to bring them in. And I think there are a couple of government people here today that have been good enough to come out. So when you look back at it, sort of pull that together a little bit, we've got simple and complicated things, clear learning objectives, the student is follower, it's easily measured, and learning is finishing. I have found that thing, I have learned that thing, I can complete that thing. I got no problem with that. There are lots of things like that. I don't want to learn how to fix my car, I just want it fixed. Tell me what I need to do and I will do it. There are lots of things that are peripheral from my interests that I'm super happy to have someone just tell me how to do. When it comes to the things I care about, when it comes to things that are important to me, when it comes to complexity, I just think learning is something that has to be ongoing inside of our professional space. Student as leader, it's not directly measurable, and learning ends up being becoming. So I just want to use one more medical example, and I'll let this go and we'll move on. So we're making a transition from a content-based medical school to a competency-based medical school this year. So I have 180 physicians who work for us at the school, and every one of them, was it 20 years of education we have to unlearn them? In this case, it's more like 25, because they're all doctors. And we have to convince them that somehow competency is something that's relevant to them. And the truth is medical education is actually founded on the principle of mentorship. So in our school, the first 2 years, you sit in a lecture, you do some practice and whatever else, but from there, from year 3 to year 5 or 7, depending on what you take, basically becoming a doctor involves following doctors around and trying to act like doctors until eventually people think you're a doctor. Like, it's really not a lot more complicated than that. So in year 3, my students go into the hospital, and for 6 weeks blocks, they go to OBGYN, they go to obstetrics, they go to surgery, and they follow the doctors around. And then when they go in for residency, they follow doctors around. And they learn to become a doctor by the process of being around doctors. There's no content taught in the medical program that is essential to any doctor. They need a lot of that content, but which of it is doesn't matter. No, you're giving me that face that people always, it doesn't matter which of the content they pick up. Because as they go along, they'll get more of it, they'll get more of it, they'll get more of it. But because I tested them in their 4th week of school on whether or not they know what medication to use for what blood virus, doesn't mean they're going to remember it 7 years later when they're sitting in front of a patient. So the memory of the content's not relevant. It's the immersion into the field that matters, right? So, but the problem is what do we do with that untethered learner? If we give a learner the chance to just go and do whatever they want, how do we know they're going to work? How are they going to organize themselves? How do we guarantee they've learned? We can't. But the point that I'm making is we don't now. We don't know by the time a doctor graduates. Nobody knows in any medical program anywhere in the world whether or not they actually know what they need to know to be a doctor. We don't have that guarantee now. All we have is a large number of doctors who've worked with that doctor, and each one of them says, yeah, okay. They're entrustable. That is, I think I can trust that person to do that thing. And that's the extent of the assessment that happens at the high end. And I'm suggesting we can do that for an awful lot of other things. Right? So I'm not even proposing a model that, I mean, it's certainly easier with the technology, but it already exists inside of our culture. We just don't look at it that way. We don't like to think that our doctors are not necessarily guaranteed to know the things they don't. But there's no way for them to know everything. Right? So how do we tell whether or not she's a doctor? My guess is probably not. Right? In this picture, is she a doctor? Maybe. She's young. She'd be awful smart if she is. And that's great if she is. But we have that process where we've judged it, but there's no guarantee that she's any good. Right? And that is already true of the professionals that we have. So what I'm saying is from that rhizomatic point of view, the curriculum of learning is not the content. The content, you need some content, but which it is not important. The curriculum is the other people that you're around. And learning is that becoming process of being a doctor or anything else that we're working on. I'm going to leave that off because I think I'm over time. So what I'm talking about is that in 2018, the biggest challenge is to be able to learn what you don't know you need to know. And the only way to do that is to commit to learning inside of a community of people who care what you care about the things you care about. Find those mentors like Lisa guiding me through Sagrada Familia, right? Find those people who can help you along the way, but not worry about where you're going. Thanks.